Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point. Welcome back to the Magical Salon, everyone. My name is Amanda, your space explorer.
And I'm James, your resident astronomer.
I should have been a cosmic explorer instead of a space explorer. But as you can tell, we're getting into some space and some dimensional work here. We're going to be exploring the fourth dimension. And although we haven't quite begun talking yet, my head already hurts. So since you're a resident fourth dimension expert, would you mind giving us the groundwork?
Well, I hesitate to call myself an expert in the fourth dimension, as I think way smarter people than me have tried to tackle this. But it's an interesting concept just because you kind of hear it talked about in modern parlance a lot. But essentially, you hear it as kind of it's either 4D is like the space-time continuum. That's kind of a way of people framing it. Or like there's difference between spatial dimension and then like time is not it's a measure of how fast you move in 3 dimension, if that makes sense. It's kind of all connected. And so basically the fourth dimension kind of it's not possible for humans to actually see. Like that's kind of how dimensions work, is you can't see above your dimension. You can see down, but you can't see up. The best way to explain it is the metaphor of the book called Flatland by Edwin Abbott, and it came out in like the 1880s. And essentially he uses a 2D world, Flatland, where they only have length and width, but height does not exist. So you can only move forward, backward, left and right. You cannot go up and down. And so from that perspective, up and down don't exist. Like they can't conceptualize it. So from our perspective, the fourth dimension, we also can't see it, if that makes sense. Like a line on a piece of paper cannot see up, right?
Right. So in other words, the best way to understand the fourth dimension, which is hard to grasp, is to try and understand how the third dimension appears to two-dimensional beings, which is basically what he was exploring in Flatlands. So if there's only 2 dimensions and a 3D object appears, you can't see it in its entirety. All you see is the shadow of it. So it would appear as a very strange object that you had never seen before and that you could not really reconcile with your existing worldview. Would you say that's true?
Yes. And I think going on with the Flatland idea, there's a really, really good YouTube video with Carl Sagan where he essentially illustrates the book Flatland, at least the concept. And it's good because you can visually see the example. And you need to imagine, right? You cannot see it exactly, which is why you use like these metaphors or analogies or like a correspondence, right? What would it look like for a 3D being to talk to a 2D being? And then you have to imagine what would it look like for a 4D being to talk to a 3D being, right? If you kind of have a frame of reference of what that might look like, then how could you interact with a higher dimension? Or rather, how would it interact on our plane?
The way that I best understood it is by going to the Carl Sagan YouTube video, which will be linked in our show notes. And even after you watch the video, your mind will still sort of be spinning. But that's part of the fun of thinking about stuff like that, or stuff like this in my mind. So I guess going along with, because this episode is going to sort of focus on Carl Sagan in relation to the fourth dimension, because I feel like he was an interesting figure. He was an astronomer as well as a science communicator. And he wrote a book inspired by a photograph titled The Blue Dot, which is a photo of Earth taken from Voyager 1. Probably one of the most famous space photos ever taken, I would say.
What is Voyager 1?
Voyager 1, I think, Voyager 1 and 2 were like the first interstellar spacecrafts. So I guess interstellar means it's leaving the solar system. Is that how that's defined?
They are satellites, right? Like they are not there are not people on these, right? These are unmanned probes that were launched into the galaxy, basically. And that's the trippy thing is, I'm pretty sure they're just gonna go out there forever, floating into the ether, right? Essentially.
Yeah, so backing up, the YouTube video that we're mentioning is a clip from Carl Sagan's show called Cosmos, where he basically just explained a lot of difficult to understand science concepts to a layperson audience, kind of how Neil deGrasse Tyson has to people of our generation, I would say.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, in fact, revived the show The Cosmos.
Did he?
Yes, because like 40 years or some amount of time had passed from the original airing. Carl Sagan died. To your point, they were like, well, we need a new science communicator. Like the field has changed a little or whatever. So they made a new show and Neil deGrasse Tyson is the host. It's a very funny parallel.
One of the things in the Carl Sagan YouTube video from Cosmos that he mentions, he talks about how when you go down a dimension, you're like losing something, which is partly why a 3D object cannot be represented in its entirety in a 2D space. You lose something when you go down a dimension. But he also talks about how if a 3D object like an apple tries to speak to a 2D being, such as a square, the voice appears for the square from within, which is an interesting idea. And in terms of magic and kind of what we're interested in, like magic, intuition, and things from that sphere, including God, are those not people playing in the fourth dimension and beyond and communicating with us, and we just cannot see them in their entirety?
I think calling them people is where you run into problems, right? Because we are 3D beings. But I think what people talk about, where it gets trippy specifically with like the idea of consciousness, AI, our bodies move in 3 dimensions, right? And even that is pretty barely, like you cannot move very drastically in 3 dimensions on Earth because of gravity. Like I can only jump a foot or two off the ground, or I can lay on the ground, or I can dig a hole. Like we use technology to go higher or lower, like through planes and stuff. But in terms of our everyday life, humans are pretty, like we go up and down obviously, but we're not really utilizing that much space.
I guess, but that doesn't really answer my question, which is, do you think that magic, intuition, and God, things that are of the realm of God, so anything supernatural, I would say, which it's weird to kind of characterize God as supernatural, but because it's so beyond the human, I feel like it is supernatural because it is beyond human comprehension. I feel like that is kind of what makes something supernatural, or that's one explanation of it. Like, do you think that if not humans, there are beings communicating from a higher dimension than ours?
Well, think of ghosts even. You could argue a ghost is something that's in a different dimension, but it can interact with this plane in weird instances or through weird mediums, right? So like when you hear of like poltergeists and stuff, they're not usually directly touching people, I don't think. It's more like manipulating a TV channel, or they turn on the alarm every night at a certain time, right? They're, to your point earlier, they don't manifest the way, like it's not a body that's physically here. And the example that Carl Sagan uses is like an apple. The only part that is visible is the specific slice that's on that plane at that point in time. So a 4D being to us, think of like if you're walking through water and you're wading into the pool, right? As the water line goes from your feet up, that would be like where that line is, would be what's on that plane. So if you walked into the water and submerged yourself, your feet would be in, so you'd be appearing as 2 different points, right? Like, and then it would get wider and wider up to your waist, and then like, do you know what I mean? It's trippy. So a 4D being would be like that to us. Like we would see just a random arm fly out of nowhere and then disappear.
Okay, so there's a lot to go from there. So I guess firstly, is it not similar to how, you know, how in school, for some reason we had to do this so often, where you would get like a huge piece of butcher paper and you would lay down and someone would trace your body. And I remember doing it in anatomy because then we had to trace like where all the veins and the capillaries and stuff were. But that's kind of how, if you were laying down, how you would appear as a 2D rendering of yourself. But if you were like purely 2D, looking at the outline of a person would not really tell you much about what they actually looked like, right? Because you could only see them in one way.
There's no dimension.
Yeah. So then here's an interesting question because as we mentioned, Carl Sagan like sent the first physical messages into space, which were sent in the 1970s, the Pioneer plaque and then the Voyager golden records. The Pioneer plaque is, well, it is what it sounds like. It's like an artistic plaque, and there's a bunch of stuff on there, including a man and a woman, a picture of the solar system, and like the route that the Pioneer is going to be taking. Then there's like a diagram of the hydrogen atom. And then on the Voyager golden records, those are like phonographs. So they're like auditory renderings of everything on Earth, or that's what they're going for. So there's sound and other information that's supposed to encapsulate the entirety of all the diversity on Earth, which that's a huge task to be undertaken. But I guess he's trying to potentially communicate with someone out there, right? Someone being an alien of some sort. And I know he's said before, like, that it's sort of like launching a bottle into the cosmic ocean, which is an interesting way of thinking about it. And most likely nobody will ever encounter that, even though it's going to be there traveling through space for billions and billions of years and will be the oldest artifact of mankind. But I guess it makes me think in terms of the aliens. Like, do you think UFOs are just like the shadow of 40 beings?
Also, for the record, he did not send it by himself. He did it with NASA, right? Like the US government is what actually launched this thing.
Okay, that's semantics, but yeah.
I mean, it is, but I think it's important to mention, partially because of this. Like, nowadays, Elon Musk, like, if you don't know who Carl Sagan is, just some rich asshole could just do this. And it's like, oh yeah, I told the entire galaxy where we're located. So if an alien does find it, what if they're not friendly? They now know exactly how to find us, because that's all contained on this thing.
Well, theoretically, there's some debate as to whether, because the attempt was to create a universal language that could be understood by everyone, and namely, that's the language of science and math. But there still were some things that they weren't sure, like if another people would even understand that, because the aliens would have to be like a lot more advanced than us. Otherwise, they would never be able to communicate with us. I guess it's more like he's clearly was operating from a love rather than a fear-based reality situation. Because if you were just operating from a fear-based reality, you would never send a message out into space with your exact coordinates.
I mean, that's true. It is interesting too, though, the concept of encapsulating the entire species, right? Like the human race, essentially, and Earth. So, like, I think they had recording of the sound of the oceans. They had, like, a bunch of different languages sampled at various points. And it's all, to your point of it being a phonograph, it was, like, etched into a gold, kind of like vinyl record, so that you could physically recreate the sound. It's not a digital thing. I guess it's interesting, though, because they're kind of trying to, speaking of dimension, they're trying to encode sound, 3D human noise and stuff onto a disc that they can then just launch into the future somewhere, way out into the space, and then you can pick up this disc and then hear exact replicas of a human voice speaking French, speaking English, speaking Chinese. Oh, you can hear the wave of the ocean just because you're spinning a disc. I think that's just kind of a crazy thought.
If an alien species is that much more advanced than us, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they could move throughout dimensions or that they can see dimensionally from a much higher perspective than us. So they could be living in like 6 dimensions and we're down here in 3 dimensions, right? So I guess that's partly what I'm saying with these 4D shadows. Like when you see the iconic look of like what you think of when you envision a UFO with like the three lights floating through the sky, it kind of seems like the apple thing where Carl Sagan was pressing the apple into ink and then pressing it onto paper onto a 2D space, and it's like it was like three marks or a weird shape. That's what kind of made me think of the UFO. Like if it's descending from another dimension, is that all we can see?
Well, that would be what it is. And I guess, yeah, I get what you're saying now. So, like, from his example, the apple talking down into the square, the voice is coming from inside the square's mind. But in a lot of, like, the Bible, Moses is spoken to directly, right?
I don't know why I'm quoting the Bible. I don't know anything about the Bible.
These people or prophets have direct revelation, and they always describe it as being spoken to by God. Are they crazy? Are they talking to like an alien, to your point? Or is God a higher dimensional being? Because to us, a 4D being or a 5D being is a God. Like they would know where we are at every moment in time. They could see that, like, time would not exist to them. Like they are outside of time, right? It's trippy to think about. And so that would be, to your point, yes, like a god could be a higher being playing, so to speak, in our realm or just kind of dabbling here and there.
Yes. Well, it ultimately gets to the question of what is a god? Is a god something or someone who is responsible for creating everything, which is sort of how we mostly envision gods? But then there's also the flip side. It's like, they acted like a god, like they're taking things into their own hands, or like you're a god in comparison to the ants. So it's also inherently a power dynamic differential. It's like if you are that much more powerful and you can see in 10 dimensions and I can only see in 3 dimensions, are you not sort of like a god to me? Like a 4D being could theoretically see inside and around us simultaneously, like X-ray vision. But then also they can see our entire life timeline all at once. So instantaneously, they know everything that will ever happen to us. Does that not make them a god in comparison to us?
For me, I can envision it like this. So think of, if you are drawing on a sheet of paper, I can draw a little stick figure, right? I can erase him and kill the stick figure. I just created and destroyed a stick figure. That's a 2D being from this example. But it's so trivial to you that it doesn't even register. Like I made a little 2D person and then I deleted them.
Well, it's like ants. When you kill an ant, a lot of the time you don't even think about it.
Or you step on them probably all the time without even realizing it, especially when you're wearing shoes and stuff. That's also the idea of as above, so below. It's like correspondence. So like this plane of existence is similar to the one above it to some extent. So there's somebody that's a creator doing something over there. And I guess that's how you get into the whole idea of we're living in a simulation, because Grand Theft Auto, those are all NPCs. But at what point is it not a character and it's a life? And then it's just living on a disc. So technically, I know exactly what that character's programmed to do at all times.
Well, and if you were a 4D being and you could see everything that ever happened down below in terms of whatever happened to the 3D beings, like you would know how they would react to everything because you would be seeing what they were gonna do or what they had already done, but you could see it. So nothing would ever take you by surprise. So in the beginning, you said something to the effect of there are different ways of thinking about dimensions in terms of basically who's doing the asking. So from a science perspective, the fourth dimension, like for Einstein, was and is time. And like for mathematics people, they often use 4D to understand hypershapes and stuff, like things like tesseracts that only exist in 4 dimensions. But then on the flip side, of course, you have like all the people who are interested in spirituality and sort of like esoteric studies. So for them, it's like, oh, well, is the astral plane the fourth dimension? Am I tapping in and using insight and like talking to people who have come before me? Is it just because it's like beyond our comprehension? Like there's a lot of different understandings of it.
I don't know where I was going with that. I think I wasn't going anywhere. I was just hoping you would have something to respond to.
What is moving the objects through space? That's the thing, like consciousness. So think of like going on a run. You're moving your 3D body in 4 dimensions, technically. If time is the 4th dimension, movement is technically interacting with the 4th dimension, right?
Well, you're moving through time even if you're not physically moving, though.
It's kind of going to the Tao in some ways. Like it's beyond your comprehension. And that's kind of the point, right? To the square, in the example, it is aware that there's a higher dimension and it blows its mind, literally. It's like, what the hell? Like, because we would go up into a thing that's not there, right? Like in Interstellar, he's like in that bookshelf or something, and he can see into a billion different, it goes forever, and it's all the same room, but slightly different, because it's him living out like all these alternate realities simultaneously, or something crazy. He's in a tesseract. But I guess the point is that's them trying to portray it, I guess, another way of trying to visualize it. And in that case, they try to portray a tesseract, whereas Carl Sagan is more just like trying to help you conceptualize it, which I do actually, and this is kind of going to the magic thing. Part of why I like that video so much, the Carl Sagan one and the book Flatland, they put the onus on you to think about the concepts being discussed and imagine for yourself.
Yeah, well, that I think illustrates why people like Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson are so important. And you basically just described why science communicating is a thing. It's because you need someone who knows it inside and out to teach it to you, because teaching is the hardest thing, because you need to know something super well and you need to be able to explain it at a multitude of levels. If you really know it, you should be able to explain it at a kindergarten level, at a high school level, and also at a graduate level. That's true mastery of a subject in my mind, and why most people never get to that level. But I think like people like Carl Sagan and in that video and all the comments on the YouTube video illustrated, they're like, oh, like this is such a complicated thing, but I feel like I'm finally understanding it, or I'm close to understanding it. I can glimpse it, and that's more than I ever have been able to in the past. You know, there's a lot of people who, once they have knowledge, they're sort of like hoarding it, or they only want to talk in their like jargony circles to people who also know things really well, and they want to kind of perform how well they know it. But it's like you should be able to explain it and instill a passion for the subject in anyone of any age. That's what you should really strive for. That's mastery.
To be able to teach something, you have to know it so well that you can recreate an experience in someone else so that they know it as well, which is kind of trippy.
Well, you're trying to instill a eureka moment to some extent in someone else, which is hard to do, because that's genuine learning. When you have an eureka moment and you really feel like you understand or glimpse something, you're getting closer to knowledge, but it's hard to create those moments in others.
That should be the weekly wisdom. You were talking about teaching, and didn't your grandma send something about teaching, that proverb?
Oh, yeah. So my grandmother is working on her memoirs about her life, and she's been sending it to me, and I've been reading it and enjoying them. She kind of starts out by talking about her elementary school years and the learning environment that she had there, and she references this Chinese proverb: teachers open the door, you enter by yourself.
And again, it's kind of getting to the idea of magic. Like, it's a portal, basically. Like, teachers can show you a way. Like, they can show you a path and carve a trail, but you have to walk down it yourself at a certain point.
Right. Well, and she was talking about how it really set the scene for self-directed learning, which has been a big theme in her life. Like, she has her PhD and stuff. Teachers open the door, you enter by yourself. Just that first part In order to open the door, you still have to have done a lot of groundwork, right? To my prior comment, it's really not so easy as just pushing it open. In some ways, you have to create a door and then also teach the person how to actually move through it.
We're getting excited talking about this because we are kind of learning as we go in a way. But it's fun to discuss. It's kind of imaginative, it's creative. It's a bit fantastical, but it's like these are like physicists and stuff talking about aliens. Like this guy went to Harvard and taught at Cornell and helped with NASA. And this guy's like talking about how we need to shoot satellites out with our location, about how we need to use radio waves to monitor the sky for signs of alien life, how 4 dimensions exist, how you can imagine it. He's imagining, right? He's playing.
I was watching a video in preparation for this episode, and Carl Sagan just said something to the effect of, scientists and people who are religious are all just trying to answer like the same questions in life. They're after the same truths, they just go about it in different ways. It's also a good tie-in to Salvador Dali's painting that I encountered while I was preparing for this episode. Dali was a bit problematic. So the painting is called Crucifixion, parentheses, Corpus Hypercubus, in parentheses, from 1954. And it's Christ being crucified on an unfolding tesseract. And when he's describing it, he called it, quote, a metaphysical, mathematical, and spiritual representation of transcendence. So not only is that interesting and a cool tie-in to the 4th dimension because it's a hypercube, or I mean it's a tesseract, maybe those are the same thing. It also just goes back to the 3 different paths, for example. Metaphysical, mathematical, spiritual, like science, right? Like it's like all this paths to transcendence, which is ultimately what we're most focused on in this pod.
So it's a painting. He's portraying 4 dimensions on 2D.
Well, and his most famous painting is like the melting clocks or whatever. It's not called that, but that's the best way to describe it. But anyway, the point is, like, time is also to many people, as we've been talking about, considered a dimension. So he's also, like, that's a theme throughout his work that I never really understood or thought much about until, like, I was prepping for this app. So that's interesting. Also, here's an interesting thought. When we were talking about what is God, Carl Sagan also was talking about how, to Einstein, God was just the sum of all laws of the universe.
That's kind of boring, though.
He's basically saying, I don't believe in God. I only believe in what I can see and prove, which is these laws of the universe. But at the same time, you could kind of see that in a spiritual way. Like, if there are laws, then there's some reason for them having existed, even if you can't discern what that is.
Think of all these scientists and stuff that they're just like trying to like measure down to the last detail to figure out why things happen. At a certain point, it's like, I think it's futile, right?
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to, is your dominating worldview one of cause and effect or one of synchronicities and magical coincidences? Those are 2 different ways of perceiving the world, and it's perhaps fair to say that neither of them are exclusively true. Like, the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's a mix of the 2. What are your feelings on time capsules as a concept? I've always found them to be kind of trippy. They've always kind of resonated with me. Even like in school, I remember them doing time capsules. Like, I don't remember really... Oh no, I think I made a time capsule for myself, and then like a few years later, we opened it. Like senior year, we opened it, and we had made it freshman year, maybe. That's what it was, and I thought that was a very cool thing.
So interesting, though. So think of time capsules. This is crazy, but that got me thinking. If time is the 4th dimension, to your point, you can move through time without moving, right? I'm doing it right now. Now. It's a different moment, right? But think about it, though, from the perspective of like the internet now. Most people, they will have a digital online trace forever, way longer than they are physically alive. So kind of people are going to become immortalized.
Part of my consciousness will live on. Do you have anything else about the 4th dimension or aliens?
time is the fourth. Let's say time, the space-time continuum, right? So to enact in some ways, right? Think of like the phrase, the only way out is through. You have to kind of push through time to make something happen is determination, perseverance, discipline, which requires you holding fast to an idea and physically doing the act.
Yeah, well, it's you're making the world move around you, which is magic.
So magic is kind of pushing through the fourth dimension, you could say, maybe.
It's kind of taking at least from the fourth dimension. Okay, do you have any other final thoughts? Because we have to save our true thoughts on aliens for another episode.
No. I think we're signing out.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone. Try and live dimensionally, or don't. It's up to you. Out.